Is this working? Great. Well, it is good to be here this morning. It feels like it's been a month since I've been here. I've been sick the past couple of weeks. In fact, I was supposed to give this sermon last week. I told Danny the Wednesday before that, yeah, I'm feeling great. Shouldn't have any problem with giving the sermon on Sunday. And then I slept 2 hours the following night and was sick with a sinus infection and bronchitis. But I'm here now, and I'm sure you're all happy about that. So, let's go ahead and get started. This is the title of the sermon. We're going to start off with a question. We have a $100 check that Shannon's going to write out to anyone who can correctly guess this. What happened 78 years ago last Monday? You could tell, it would be more relevant last Sunday, but January 30th, 1945. Any guess? Anything? No. World War II did not end January 30th, 1945. Probably. All right, well, good, because I didn't really have $100 to spare, but... So, what happened was deemed the most successful prisoner of war rescue in World War II, known as the raid at Cabanatuan. So, I first learned about this in my last college lecture, and the professor used the title, and loosely, "Don't let them get you down." He had a choice word put in there that I couldn't include, but this is where I first heard about it, and I thought, everyone needs to hear about this. So, a little bit of background. So, in World War II, you had three theaters, three main areas where war was happening. You had the European, then you had Pacific, and you had North Africa, Middle East. World War II technically started in 1939. That's when it's considered. The U.S. did not enter World War II until December 1941. U.S. knew that we were probably going to enter the war at some point, so we started making preparations, but we didn't officially enter until the attack of Pearl Harbor. Probably the most famous thing that people know about World War II, up there with D-Day in Normandy and stuff like that. One thing that you might not know is that within hours of the attack of Pearl Harbor, a bunch of attacks were launched on islands in the Pacific by Japan, including in the Philippines. So, this is a map you might be able to see, might not. The blue above the orange, that is the Philippine Islands. And this shows just, how it was divided up in 1939, basically right before the war started. This is a map of attacks that Japan launched in December of 1941. I know you can't see it. There's a lot of December 8th, so within hours of the attack on Pearl Harbor, some December 10th, and then there's a lot around December 20th through the 25th. The early attacks were basically them setting things up to have airfields and stuff like that on these islands. They were strategic, but not really important. The major attacks happened around December 23rd. So, this is the Philippine Islands, and this is basically the plan that the U.S. had in case there was an attack. At first, they were going to defend everywhere, but then they fell back to a previous plan called War Plan Orange 3. And the yellow highlighted area, that is the critical part. That is the area known as Bataan, and it is by the Manila Bay. And the Army knew that they needed to control that bay, and whoever controlled that would control the Philippine Islands. So, this is 1 month after the attack what they controlled. So that yellow region right there, this would be what they had probably December 23rd or so. Within a month, they fell back to half of that yellow area. Most of that was strategic because that was the plan. Fall back, defend this area at all cost. And this is what makes Pearl Harbor so critical, is they were trying to do this to withhold and wait for reinforcements to come. Reinforcements from Pearl Harbor. That's what made it so devastating, is that now they are out in the open without reinforcements being able to come. Another thing, they were not ready for it because the most advanced weapons were at Pearl Harbor. What was at the Philippines was literal World War I leftover. They were using equipment from World War I against the Japan Army. So this is what they ended up having into January. And that's not, out of the ordinary. This is Japan's control in July. All those attacks were extremely successful, and they were able to expand what they controlled massively. That's where they were in January. Things weren't looking good. By March 12th, it was futile. There was no chance of them winning this. So President Roosevelt told General MacArthur to gather up him and other high-level commanders and to flee to Australia. He was needed for them to push back later on once they can regroup and actually put up a fight. MacArthur declared that he shall return. The remaining troops held out for about another month until they officially surrendered. The main reason that they surrendered is that they ran out of food a few weeks beforehand, and they had no medicine, and most of the troops had malaria or other diseases. They were not in good shape. When Japan was planning this, they were under the impression that if everything goes according to plan, they needed to account for about 30,000 prisoners of war, maximum, potentially as low as 10,000. They ended up having 75,000 prisoners of war that they had to account for. Thus began what's known as the Bataan Death March. Not going to get into it too much, but it was very gruesome. It was a 60 to 65 mile march to the prisoner of war camps, and a lot of deaths happened on this march. So, that's the background. Now let's get into the rescue. It is January 28th, 1945, so 3 years later. The rescue began, it began planning shortly before that. The U.S. was starting to make grounds and recapture territory, and this was the largest prisoner of war camp left in the Philippines. They needed to rescue them because if they didn't, they would probably die. So, it started with a 30-mile journey behind enemy lines to get to this camp. And they had to, it was 120 U.S. troops, roughly, and over 200 of the local Philippine army that were guiding them through this. Some of the Philippine troops went ahead, and they would do things such as alert the villagers that they were coming through, and they would also tie bamboo around dogs' mouths so that way they would not bark and alert the Japanese troops nearby. So, 30-mile journey behind enemy lines, and for reference, that is about the distance from here to Pinson. So imagine that walk. January 29th, they set up base in a town 5 miles north of the camp, and then they were planning. They sent out scouts ahead to scout the area, and then they regrouped. The camp had about 250 Japanese guards. few hundred yards away, there was 1,000 soldiers and an army or battalion of tanks that would be within gunshot range of the base. And then a few miles down the road at Cabanatuan was 7,000 troops. The 1,000 troops, most of them, were going to be leaving the following day. So they postponed the raid by 24 hours. January 30th, they start to get in position, 700 yards outside of the camp around 6 p.m. The Filipino guerrillas were set up along the road, overlooking a bridge, and then also on the other side in case reinforcements came from Cabanatuan. Around 7 p.m., a Black Widow plane was sent as a distraction. It's one of the first references that we have of aircraft being used as a distraction. A lot of them said that it was a ridiculous idea, but the pilot was so good at his job, did such a good job distracting, that they were able to get in position and not be noticed. He was doing things such as flying 100 feet above the camp, which is way lower than they were originally planning. He would stall out above the camp, cut off his engines, wait till he gets about 100 feet above, then turn them back on to where it backfires super, super loud to where all they could do was focus on this plane. He did a fantastic job, and without them, they would have been discovered. He does that for about 30 minutes while they're crawling through a dried out rice field where they were completely exposed. So they get to the outside of this camp, and around 7:40, that's when the raid starts. Within 15 seconds of the first shot, all the guard towers and bunkers were destroyed. The nearby bridge that the Filipino guerrillas were guarding was set off with demolitions. It wasn't completely destroyed, but it was severely damaged to where the tanks wouldn't be able to come. And this is something that I found extremely interesting. One of the Filipino guerrillas, who was trained to use the bazooka just a few hours beforehand, took out 4 tanks by himself. Talk about on-the-field training. I mean, just imagine it. Here's an Army Ranger. It's like, here's a bazooka, aim through that, shoot, reload. You got it? Okay. And then you take out 4 tanks that if you didn't, the whole thing would have just fell apart. So this is the layout of the camp. The red circles on the outside and the gray little square on the left, those are the guard towers and what's known as pillbox bunkers. Those were what were destroyed within 15 seconds. So this is the layout of the camp. To the left, you have Cebu, and that's where the bridge was that was destroyed. And then 5 miles to the right, you have Cabanatuan. So the Filipino troops were set up over there to protect in case reinforcements came. But this just gives you a visual aid. Raid lasted approximately 35 minutes. After 20 minutes, no more gunfire was heard. Took them 20 minutes to clear out the camp and then 15 minutes to confirm that there was no more Japanese troops there. Now they had to round up the POWs and begin heading back, and this was a little bit more challenging than you would think because a lot of them were so severely malnourished and sick that they could not walk. And a lot of them, like said earlier, they were used to World War I equipment. The uniforms that they were using was completely different. The rifles that they were using was completely different. They weren't even sure if these were actual American troops or not because everything had changed from 3 years ago when they were originally captured. So they had to be convinced. But they finally were rounded up. A lot of the Rangers had to carry POWs back, and they also had carts that they were given by villagers to load them up. By 8:40, 1 hour after the raid started, the camp was cleared out, all the POWs were gathered, and they signaled to the Filipino troops that they could fall back. They didn't have to defend anymore. We're ready to leave. The troops stayed longer to make sure that nobody was coming over the bridge. They got everyone except for one troop. It was a deaf British soldier who fell asleep in the latrine. And because he was deaf, he did not hear the commotion that was going on around him. He woke up to an empty camp that morning. He assumed either two things, either that the Japanese guards killed everyone, or more likely that that there was a rescue that took place and that they would come back and look for him. So he shaved, got his best clothes on, and then he walked out, and he was picked up by the Filipino guerrillas. So that was the most successful prisoner of war rescue. And everyone played a part in it, whether it was the pilot that masterfully distracted the Japanese guards, the Filipino army, the American troops. 15 seconds and you destroy every single guard tower and bunker, all the main defense that the Japanese army had. That is incredible. And not only that, but you had to walk 30 miles behind enemy line to be able to get there. Just incredible. I don't know about you, but this story kind of reminds me of a few things. The first thing that popped into my mind when I heard this was the parable of the lost sheep. The entire story and everything that happens. This is what's in Luke 15, verses 1 through 7. Let's go ahead and read it. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go on to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. So this is what this story reminds me of. It's pretty similar, except for, I'm sure the shepherd wasn't dealing with machine gun fire and having to go 30 miles behind enemy lines. But it's the closest we have in the Bible. A few other things that it reminds me of is stuff in Luke 15. Right after this, Jesus goes into the parable of the lost coin and then the prodigal or lost son. So let's read that now. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man has 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, his son packed all of his belongings and moved to a distant land, where he then wasted all his money in wild living. About that time, his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his field to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods where he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food, enough to spare, and I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against both you and heaven, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son.' But his father said to the servant, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening, for we must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found.' So the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. 'Your brother is back,' he was told, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return.' The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, 'All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours, who's come back and squandered all your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf.' His father said to him, 'Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found.'" This entire chapter is really the epitome of God's forgiveness. And it's interesting. It's not, "Yeah, okay, I'll forgive you." It's not, "Fine, whatever." It is a celebration over this forgiveness. They are having parties in heaven over this. Imagine any time that a sinner repents is like New Year's when the ball drops at midnight. That is what's happening in heaven whenever someone repents. So what are we supposed to take away from Luke 15? No one is beyond forgiveness, it's obvious. Nothing makes God happier than when a sinner repents and when someone that's lost is found. But we can look further beyond that. That's just a surface level looking. We're supposed to be like Christ. So how does that apply to us? How does this forgiveness and level of forgiveness apply to us? Well, in our attempts to be Christ-like, we need to forgive those that have wronged us, no matter how bad it is. We have the parable of the unrepentant servant, where the servant gets his talents forgiven that he owed so much to, but then he can't forgive the guy that owes him pennies, basically. And this tells us that, here, whatever happens on earth is nothing compared to what God could hold against us, but he chooses not to if we forgive others. In addition, it shows us that we need to ask forgiveness when we've wronged someone, and we need to be sincere about it. And this is for both when we do something wrong in God's eyes or if it's just another human. We need to be repentant. We need to ask for forgiveness in both situations. And we also need to forgive. That's pretty much all for this that I had. There is one other thing, kind of an additional part. I don't have any slides for it, but about a week and a half ago, I had a former teacher pass away, named Mark Ridgway. By all accounts, he was a great guy. He was a pastor at a church. He was a teacher for years. He was my bus driver. He was a great guy. I just wanted to share one thing that I remember about him. When I was in 10th grade, he was my teacher, but I was trying to set up the bass fishing team at the high school. We didn't have it, but I was doing some research into it, and one of the things you had to have was a teacher or coach from the school to represent you. So I'm talking with the principal and trying to get, people interested in it and needed a coach. So I went to him and asked him if he would want to be it. He was so excited about it. I have no idea if he's ever fished in his life. He could have hated bass fishing. I don't know. But he was so excited to be able to help a student. And that kind of reminds me, or that's an example of what we need to do. When someone comes to us for help, regardless of what it is, to be a good Christian, we should be that excited to help somebody in need. Regardless of if it's helping somebody move or whatever. We're supposed to be absolutely excited at the opportunity to be able to help somebody in need. That's all I got. Thank y'all.